When I was 18, I got cosmetic surgery. Please don't mock me. I was immature and made a lot of bad choices. But I always wanted a large chest. I went to the local hospital, Gleeville Hospital. I met with the surgeon, Dr. Mertz, and picked out my size. And I discussed prices. Fortunately, I had the money saved up, so that wasn't an issue. I was so excited to get my implants, everything seemed to be falling into place. And the day of my surgery didn't go too well. I got to the hospital and was prepped for surgery. As I was lying in the hospital bed, a large black man with a deep southern accent walked into the room and began talking to me. He said his name was Michael Miracle, and he explained how that, just an hour ago, Dr. Mertz broke his arm. And you can't perform surgery with a broken arm. He said that he was experienced in cosmetic surgery himself, so either he could perform the surgery or I could cancel and find a new surgeon. And I was a little impatient. Now please keep in mind again my age at the time. So I agreed to let the man perform my surgery. I was discharged from the hospital only an hour after my surgery. My boyfriend came and picked me up from the hospital. The ride was pretty bad. I was in so much pain. And the surgery went terribly. The next day, I was in unbearable pain, and although I expected my chest to be bruised and ugly, it looked like they went through a meat grinder. And I immediately went to the hospital. And they got me in right away. The nurse asked me a few questions and told me that the doctor would be with me in a few minutes. And within a few minutes, Dr. Mertz walked into the room. No cast or brace on his arm. And I asked him about his arm. Then he was confused. Not only at my question, but at my implants. I told him that Dr. Miracle was the person who performed my surgery and was the person that I thought that I had an appointment scheduled with that day. And Dr. Mertz calmly explained that he was the only cosmetic surgeon that worked in the hospital. I claimed that that clearly could not be true, because someone had to have performed my surgery. All surgeries are recorded on video. Dr. Mertz immediately had someone review the tapes to figure out who had performed the surgery, and indeed, Michael Miracle performed my surgery. Michael Miracle, a former lawyer being treated for mental illness at Gleeville Hospital. My mother always had this bad skin, Olivia said. Even when I was a child, she rarely left the house because of her face. Olivia's brown eyes darted to the side. My parents rarely spoke, but Dad always did everything for her. Mom wrote down everything that she wanted him to buy, and he bought it for her. I think it was a practical relationship. He ignored her skin, and in return, she cooked and cleaned and cared for me and went to bed with him every night. When did you find out that she wasn't normal? I asked. I'm not sure. I must have been around 7 or 8. A smile hushed over Olivia's face. Her chin followed the movement of the rest of her face with a slight delay. Actually, the first thing I remember about my mother is the smell. Her face always smelled in this nauseatingly sweet way. But I only noticed it after that she went to the doctor. And whenever she got her treatment, she usually had it overnight. Only when I got older, she sometimes got treatments when I was at school. Dad always took the day off of work to help her with the treatment. And when I woke up or came from school, her face looked much better and the smell was gone. I always thought it was strange that my mom had it, but neither my dad nor I. But I was a child. I thought it was normal. I didn't really have any friends, and so I thought that all moms were like that. How did you find out? when I was 15 or maybe 16. I rarely went out, so I really didn't see many other people. But in school we had biology and finally anatomy, and I saw that man in our book and recognized the way that his face looked, the roughness and the stiffness and the strange shimmer of it. Did you ask your mother about her condition? No. Olivia looked at me and then she looked down. I didn't dare to. I felt guilty for thinking such things. I didn't want to break her heart. But the man's photo reminded me of the way that Mom looked in the bathroom. She rarely allowed me in there when she was inside, but sometimes the lock didn't work properly, and when I was smaller, I usually didn't knock, and Olivia laughed as if it was a bad joke. Mom didn't mind when I saw her brushing her teeth, but she always screamed at me to get out whenever she rubbed her lotion in, or washed her face, or was showering. I only saw the black on her face once or twice. Olivia rubbed the wrinkly skin on her cheek. It's funny, actually. Even when I was small, I knew that other people's faces didn't change color. Only Mom's did. And most of the time it was white, but then every few weeks it slowly turned to bluish gray and then brown. And then she had her treatment, and either her face was white again or it didn't work properly and her face had some darker color. But the darker color never stayed long. Whenever it was darker, my mom had a second treatment shortly afterwards and it was white again. Did you know where your mother was getting her treatment? No. I only knew that it was somewhere out of the country, and after a treatment the car always smelled of soil, but they never took me along, even when I asked them to. So you found out when you were 15. What did you do then? Olivia bit her lip so hard that her skin ripped. Nothing, she finally said. I did nothing. I mean, she was my mom. So you just lived with her, even after you knew? Yeah, until I was 17. And then I moved out and I couldn't look at her faces anymore. Seeing her and smelling her made me feel sick. Do you have any contact afterwards? I didn't want to meet them, but we talked occasionally on the phone. I thought that they were crazy and disgusting. I even told the men that I was dating that my parents were dead. Olivia laughed again, this time with her whole chest. Only her chin stayed stiff. Ironic, isn't it? The last thing that I wanted to become was like my mother. But now... When did you start your own treatment? It's been about 2 years now. I started shortly after I was 34. I thought about it for the first time when I was 25, to cover my first wrinkles, but then even the thought of it made me want to vomit. When I was 28, the dark spots started to appear on my face, the same ones that I had on my mother's face. And I thought more and more about having my own treatment. And the spots became so dark and large that I felt that they were hideous. I hated to leave the house, and at some point I wanted to quit my job and to work online. And then while driving to the supermarket, I saw this young girl. She must have been 16 or maybe 18. Olivia pulled the skin on her face back into its position. I think that I did her a favor. She was handicapped and she must have been miserable. But such a pretty face. I offered to drive her home, and she was really happy and accepted. And I had my doubts at first, but I tested her by driving her the wrong way. And the girl didn't even try to do anything. She began to argue at first and then screamed at some point, but by then we were already out of town. And Olivia smiled. The girl only tried to fight me when I began to press on her throat. She probably had some muscle thing. Her fists didn't even reach me. I was a bit worried because I wasn't sure whether I had to cut it off first. It was the right choice to do after the girl stopped moving. I called Mom and she told me that the skin was still okay, even if they were dead for a day or even a week. Mom said that I had to treat my face with plenty of lotion, and that I would have to take it off during the shower. I'm really not allowed to talk about this. Officially, it's a lie. A myth spread by the press. But I was there. And I saw the corpses. And I saw the silicone. Now let me get this straight. This is not a story, and it won't have a satisfying, creepy and twisty ending. The most I can offer is that you might start to doubt that we humans deserve to exist. At least that's what I think right now. When I think about the people that do these things. When I think that they get money for it. When I think about the fact that somebody pays for such services. And when I know that they, buyers and sellers, are still out there. The fact is this. I didn't understand what I was seeing when I found the first corpse. The one of the young girl. Every part of her body was ripped open. And then they had made more holes and used those too. My partner at the time, Georgia, had threw up when she saw the body. We were called in and we were told that it would be a gruesome sight. But there are just some things that you don't expect to see even if you're told that you're going to see them. I too had to fight hard to hold my stomach contents back down while I was pulling the plastic sheet over the body. Usually the plastic sheet is to protect the victim from the prying eyes of curious onlookers. At that time it felt more like the sheet was to protect the potential onlookers from an image that they would never be able to get out of their head. The way that she was lying, with wounds all over her body and blood everywhere, with her lips torn and with even her eye sockets ripped open. Back when we thought that it would be an isolated incident, just an extremely violent assault. That happens far often than anyone would care to admit. And most of the times the perpetrators get away. They live normal lives. One of them probably already stood in the Starbucks queue right behind you, or thanked you when you allowed him to enter the bus first. Then, not even a month later, we got a call for a second body. Georgia and I went on the scene, but while we were sitting in our car, waiting to guard some irrelevant VIP, we heard the description on the radio. And I saw in Georgia's eyes that she too relived the scene, vivid with the sound of cars and the rancid, sweet smell of rotting flesh. They put together a task force. Georgia and I weren't even asked. We were just assigned to join it. Usually they ask, so I think that they knew that we would have said no. Now call me selfish. Sure, I wanted to catch this disgusting monster that did these crimes. But being on the task force means mostly to inspect every piece of evidence over and over. To stare at those photos for days at a time. To listen to the descriptions. To ask dozens of people questions, hoping at the same time that they know something. So that way you can end the case and catch the monster. But also at the same time that they don't know anything. Because you don't want to hear it anymore. The third body showed up not even a week later. It was dumped in an alley. No one had seen a thing. But the third one was different. He was as young as the first two. Maybe around 15. But he was a boy. Or at least he had been one. His body still looked male. They hadn't started the hormone therapy yet, but they had cut off his genitalia. And they carved something similar into his body, right where everything else should have been. There were cuts on his chest, one of which had killed him. The coroner thought that it must have been some sort of ritual, but to me it looked like something else. To me it looked as if someone had taken a boy and tried to make him a girl. None of the victims had a match in the missing person database. Imported, I thought. That's another thing that you don't want to think about, but it's real. We make jokes about the Thai lady boys. The funny moment when a Western guy goes to Thailand to get a hooker, but finds that there's one too many parts in a bed. For some of those Thai lady boys, it's a choice. But for many, it isn't. When you laugh about a ladyboy, you laugh about a poor child that likely was stolen from his home, and then made into a woman, and then forced to get assaulted, day in and day out until they die from the disease that others bring. You also don't want to think about the fact that it happens here too. In your country. We are not as superior as you think. Our criminals are just richer, and they're better at hiding it. Bodies usually don't land on the street. They end up in the sea or in an industrial meat grinder. Another reason why I don't eat minced meat. And when we found that boy, the third body, something began to click. Genetic tests confirmed it. The second body, too, had been a boy. A boy shaped into a girl and then used like a piece of meat. The first one we saw, the one I saw sprawled on the floor with holes all over her body, turned out to have actually been a girl. You might blame the coroner for sloppiness. I don't know why he wouldn't have caught the gender transformation. And I honestly don't know. Maybe scars of breast implants and beauty operations are too frequent in this side of the city business, and they just assumed that it was her trade. Either way, it was caught. And the one thing that didn't get out of my head for months and months, while all over our leads went cold and nothing else happened, during all those months, I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that they had made him into a girl. And then he lived, probably for months, maybe for years. And then one day, they decided to cut holes into his body. It was nearly 6 months after the third body that we got the call for the basement. A basement in a supposedly abandoned house with somehow too much noise for being abandoned. I wasn't at the scene, but I interviewed one of the kids later. I also saw photos of the bleak wall of bare stones, the filthy mattresses, the metal plates, and the thick metal door. It took us a while to figure out the right translator. There are too many languages in South America. And while we were looking for a translator, we weren't even sure that the kids were from South America. Most barely spoke. And even those that did speak, they spoke in a way that our native translator barely understood. That's what happens when you're born on the street in third or fourth generation. Born to a mother that lived on the street. In some countries, the police beat and kill the street children. They're considered a pest, an unsightly thing that needs to be eliminated. For example, when foreign visitors or sports events come to town, or just when a mayor wants to get reelected, they hunt the kids down. Literally. I don't know how horrible it would be to be born on the street. I don't think anyone can imagine that. The horrors that you hear at night, the screams of pain one floor up or down or next to another building that is falling apart. But the worst is that those kids feel relief when they huddle together. They feel relief that the screams that they are hearing are not their own. The boys who grow up on the streets, if they survive, are often forced to join gangs, or in some countries, the military. The girls have a different fate, if they are lucky to become dancers or waitresses. Some manage to marry gang leaders or to be the affairs of businessmen 20 or 30 years their senior. But most are forced to continue the cycle. Either they give up or they try to take money for it. Or they don't give up and they're forced to endure it anyway. Both ways, they are forced to lie in the dirt with a body moving up and down on theirs, well knowing that the action might cause the next street child to be born, if it's not growing in their belly already. You might wonder why this is relevant. And I think it's relevant because that's the only way that I can explain the kids that I was interviewing. The way that she spoke and behaved. We pulled 6 kids out of that basement. 2 girls and 4 boys. They told us that there had been 2 more boys, but they had been chosen already. They were smuggled in first by ship, then by truck carried deeper into the country. The girl told me that on the ship they had barely been able to move. 5 each were packed in one container, together with tires and metal tools. All in her container survived, but 2 in the other one, the one with the tires, had died. They didn't even open the doors. They didn't even remove the bodies. The crane heaved the container on a truck. The kids inside, aged 12 to 16, didn't even see it happening. There was no light. They had only heard and felt the metal on metal in the shaking container. And then the truck started rolling for long, loud, stuffy hours. The girl told me that she had passed out most of the time. And when they arrived smack in the night, they were hushed out of the container, straight into the house. They were told to shower. And then the boys were locked downstairs. And the girls didn't have time to relax. They were used first, and then thrown in with the boys. She told me that she and the other girls made jokes when they were thrown into the basement to the boys. It wasn't new to them. It wasn't the first time. They thought that it was their price. The last price that they had to pay before the deal came true. The deal. The one that the man in the suit had offered them back home when he had picked up the kids in the ruins of the old shop center, was that they would have to give up everything. They had to give up who they were, their names, their ethnicity, and even their language. They were told that they would be shipped out and then made fit for their future. Made fit. In that context means that they're made ready for the buyer. The buyer says what he's looking for, whether it was a girl to get pregnant or one that cannot. The girls knew that that was the deal. They willingly gave up their old life for it. Better to live in misery and in safety than to live in misery and still fear for your life. I don't know whether the boys were fully aware of what made fit meant for them. It's rare that the buyer wants to buy a boy. Rather, he wants to buy a token of power. He wants to prove his own power by taking a man and then taking away that man's manhood. The boys are not bought as boys. They're bought as trophies for their owners. Evidence of the owner's power to take everything. I don't know whether those boys also get used. Probably some are. But I don't think that that's what anybody would buy them for. They're bought because the buyer likes what the property stands for. The emasculation of the boy proves the owner's masculinity and power. And that's what it's all about. Sex and power. Humans as the ultimate toys and tokens for other humans. A month after we found the 6 children, we found the 4th body. The description matched so well that they sent a whole squad out to secure the area, collect all potential evidence, and find every possible witness. And when we arrived, there were only 4 officers at the scene. They looked pale, gray almost, and still, they stood their guard, keeping the crowd away from the alley. A crowd that normally wouldn't have bothered to look inside the grim and dirty dead end. But everything is interesting if a police car with flashing lights stands in front of it. And we walked in. 2 other officers at my side in Georgia, more careful behind us. And within a few seconds I lost my stomach and then I cried. I didn't just cry for the poor girl or the boy on the floor. I cried for the other 3. For the 3 cold faces that I had stared at hundreds of times in the previous months. And I cried for the 6 that barely got away. Number 4, who also looked like a girl but was actually a boy, looked in every way worse than the others. Everything between his legs was torn out. So was his anus and even his face. Then there was this large red tattoo on his forehead which said, Rhetor. But the worst, and the reason that I cried not just for one, but for all 4 dead teenagers, were the holes. The holes in his body weren't just gaping flesh wounds. The holes in his body. 2 holes right above the pelvis, several in the stomach, one in his side and one in his right leg, and 2 in his lower back. Weren't just holes. They were filled with rubbery material. I think that must have been their specialism. Over the years, several groups have been caught committing such crimes. But this one, they decided to be unique. Have something to offer that no one else in the world can or wants to offer. Have you ever seen a fleshlight? Those fake silicone devices. I don't want to say more than that. That's what they were. Not necessarily the brand, but something like that. They were embedded in the body, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that they were used there as well. It's been half a year now. We still haven't found any evidence. The 6 kids are in safety now, and they're lucky to be underage. They won't be deported. If you want a silver lining, there it is. 6 straight kids, still illiterate, won't be deported until a judge decides that they look like they're 18. And then they quickly need to find a job. But I still wake up with sweat covering my face and back. It's not even 2 years I've learned more than I ever wanted to know. The 6 kids knew exactly the frequency with which the man in the suit came to the ruin. Every 2 weeks, he takes his 10 kids to a better place. And those 6 kids I met, they waited for him. They came several weeks in a row, tried to be clean enough and the first ones in line so that way they could get picked for a better life. And those 4 that I met dead, they too probably waited, hoping for a better life. 2 must have learned over weeks or months that the better life was actually worse than the last one. And the silicone under your skin in between your muscles hurts and aches and itches. One was lucky enough to die before he had to live through it all. He died before the operation was finished. And I suppose those creatures that were transforming his body from male to female figured out that it would be a waste to let a good corpse go and to have fun with it. And one that's not on the official conclusion. But that's mine. One was transformed, used, and then sent back like a broken laptop. He didn't fit the specifications, I guess. Retore. As if the buyer wanted a refund. I still can't get the pictures out of my head. Any of them. But the worst is that the first girl, the one whose image is burned into my retina. Every time I see her face and body, I feel my stomach cramp. I pitied her. I felt her suffering even when I saw her for the first time. I thought that it could have well as been my mother or my sister. And now I don't think of that anymore. Now I know that she was born in the wrong place. Tried to make an escape for a better place. And only ended up worse. Now I see the gaping holes in her body, and all I can think about is how someone must have stood there, next to her body, or maybe she was still alive, to pull out all of that silicone that was in her body for months, or maybe even years.